Page 25, we're finishing up the class on kind of what is the biblical perspective, what is the Bible's perspective on saving and retirement. It kind of struck me this afternoon as I looked at how many classes we had left, what a poor job of time management that I've done, because we're not going to have the time that I hoped that we'd have for some of these last classes. So definitely finish this one tonight, and if I don't have time to say it later, Lesson 9 kind of starts a new section, and I really want to spend some time on Lessons 9 and 10. So we'll definitely do sections 1 and 2 of Lesson 9 next time, as we try to race through the rest of the month that we have together here. So section 2 on page 25, the intent is to talk about inheritance. I noticed as I read through this, there's a lot of kind of just parenting, I think, thoughts in these verses. Certainly talking about inheritance, but as I read, maybe even beyond just inheritance. But how does the Bible talk about? How does God think about? How should God's people think about leaving an inheritance or getting an inheritance? What is that? How should we think about that? So as we normally do, let's read some verses. Jonathan, you're always first. You're just so blessed. 2 Corinthians 12:14. Randy, if you don't care, 1 Chronicles 28:8. And Dad, Ecclesiastes 2:17 through 21. Let's start with these three. As we noted in the last class, kind of about saving, we will note in this class that there are conflicting, I don't know if that's the right word, but there seem to be conflicting principles in play. And how do we balance them off? This first one's just kind of an offhand comment by Paul in the midst of a very different conversation. He makes a very kind of interesting offhand comment in 2 Corinthians 12:14.
Now for the third time I'm ready to come to you, and I will not be burdensome to you, for I do not seek yours, but you. For the children ought not to live for the parents, but the parents for the children.
When Paul says, I will not be a burden, what does he literally mean in that passage? We know from the context of this chapter. What's he literally mean? I will not be a burden.
With respect to wages?
Yeah, he wasn't there to get paid. That was not his intent. Like, that was not his purpose for coming to see him. That wasn't his purpose for preaching to him. It wasn't to get paid. I will not be a burden. But then he makes this comment. Does anybody have ESV? Do you have that passage? Can you read that in the ESV, the last part of that verse?
For I seek not what is yours, but you. For children are not obligated to save up for their parents, but parents for their children.
That's an interesting word in the ESV that wasn't in Jonathan's. And again, don't want to read too much into the specific word choice of a translator, but in the ESV, children are not obligated to save up for their parents, but parents for their children. Do we think Paul is saying there that parents are obligated to save up for their children?
Could be customary. Israel.
Okay, cultures are different.
Yeah.
Yep, good thought. Okay, what do we think about that? What's our Christian perspective around that?
Does it necessarily mean after they die? Could it be,
That's a good point. I thought about that too, Karen, because there's nothing in this verse that indicates this is something you leave after you're gone, right? It may just mean provide for, and maybe even in a younger age. So I think that is important. A verse I'd like to add to this, D.A., if you don't mind, Proverbs 13:22. These will probably be the two most positive, if you're going to put them into buckets, and I'm not saying God's word is contradictory at all, I'm just saying conflicting principles. This would be the other most positive verse about this topic, Proverbs 13:22.
A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous.
A good man, can you read it one more time?
A good man leaves an inheritance to his children's children, but the sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous.
A sinner's wealth is laid up for the righteous. So the second part of that verse, is part of a different class. But if you prosper dishonestly, it doesn't last, right? We've kind of had that topic in a different class. But it kind of does indicate to me that we're talking about more than just a spiritual inheritance here, because he goes right into talking about wealth in the back half of the verse. Maybe I'm wrong. Correct me on that. But it does say a good man leaves an inheritance to his grandchildren. Now, obviously there are different ways to do that. There's spiritual inheritance. There's a legacy of godliness, things like that. But he does follow that right up by talking about that the wealth of an evil person will be used by the righteous. So, with what Paul said in 2 Corinthians 12, and then the implication, I think, of this proverb, there's at least some positive. Anybody disagree? Anybody kind of agree with that? There's some positive leaning toward someone that leaves an inheritance is doing a good thing. Good man, yeah. That seems to be the case.
There's a little bit about culture in that
Sure.
as well. Because back then they weren't leaving money, particularly.
Correct.
They were leaving land,
Yes.
and they had to have land to live on. If they didn't have the land, they were going to become a slave to somebody else.
Yes.
So, yeah, let's try to keep as much land in the family as we can so we can survive
Yes.
without becoming a slave to somebody else.
Very good point. And I think that there's all kinds of implications of that when you think about the prodigal son. We won't get into detail on the prodigal son, but I think it's relevant to this because when the prodigal son comes and asks for his inheritance, what is likely he asking the father to do? Liquidate. Yeah. So it's probably more than just divide up your bank account. It's change your life. Liquidate some of what you got.
Well, look at that. We never hear, or I never hear, we're not smart enough to pick up on it, sermons that talk about why did he do it? Why did the father do it?
Why did the father do it?
Because it was against cultural norms,
Oh.
against everything
Oh, it would have
they believed in, so why did he do that?
it would have been outrageous for the yeah.
It seemed like he didn't have it, he just did it.
He just did it.
That makes me think of the verse that says, Jesus lavishes his love on us.
Yes.
So the Father, even though it went against every cultural norm, still loved his son so much he wanted to lavish. Because that does seem lavish, like
It does.
do all this.
The word prodigal, we often hear that story about the word prodigal means lavish and spending everything that you've got. And that we use that word to talk about the son, but I've read articles where it says maybe it's better used to talk about the father. Anyway, that's a side point. Spend everything you got lavishly. Literally, the father did that. But so that leaving an inheritance is the reason that I think the parable of the prodigal son fits in there for that reason. So there are some verses that seem to indicate that leaving an inheritance is a positive thing. All right? One more of those, 1 Chronicles 28. Again, this is kind of more of an example. It's not perfect, but somewhat fits our class here. Brandy's got it.
Now therefore, in the sight of all Israel, the assembly of the Lord, and in the hearing of our God, observe and seek out all the commandments of the Lord your God, that you may possess this good land, and leave it for an inheritance to your children after you forever.
So it's speaking specifically about the land there, but this in a larger way, David charging Solomon to leave an inheritance, and I think probably in this case for all of Israel, more than maybe just his actual offspring. But this positive idea of leaving an inheritance. Okay? And now let's read a few verses that may have a different principle that we're going to have to figure out how to apply. Ecclesiastes 2, Mr. Ray.
2 verse 17.
17 through 21, please.
So I hated life, for the work which had been done under the sun was grievous to me. Of everything is futility and striving after wind. Thus I hated all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun, for I must leave it to the man who will come after me. And who knows whether he will be a wise man or a fool. Yet he will have control over all the fruit of my labor, for which I have labored by acting wisely under the sun. This too is vanity. Therefore I completely despaired of all the fruit of my labor for which I had labored under the sun. When there is a man who has labored with wisdom, knowledge, and skill, then he gives his legacy to one who has not labored with him. This too is vanity and a great evil.
So that, again, would appear to have a little different flavor than a good man leaves an inheritance to his grandchildren. All right, let's read 2 more verses, and then we'll talk about kind of in totality. Madeline, do you mind Proverbs 20 and verse 21?
An inheritance gained hastily at the beginning will not be blessed at the end.
I think this verse is incredibly important to the whole lesson here. An inheritance gained hastily in the beginning will not be blessed in the end. So let's keep that one in mind. And then Psalm 39 and verse 6. Ron, do you mind? This one ties more closely to what Dad read in Ecclesiastes. The 39th Psalm in verse 6. Yes.
Surely every man walketh in a vain show. Surely they are disquieted in vain. He heapeth up riches, and knoweth not who shall gather them.
There's a little bit, I think, of a similar flavor to what is in Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes certainly puts more of an exclamation point on it. And I'm going to turn back to that verse in Ecclesiastes. Wanted to have those other ones in our thinking. But I'm going to turn back to Ecclesiastes 2. If you'll come back there with me. Verse 21 is a little bit, I'm not going to say hard to reconcile, but it does make us think. Maybe with a little different way than we might, we would typically think about leaving an inheritance as a very positive thing. Because sometimes a person, this is English Standard, because sometimes a person who has toiled with wisdom and knowledge and skill must leave everything to be enjoyed by someone who did not toil for it. This also is vanity. And not only just vanity, this is a great evil. So, what do you see in those verses? And apply other Bible principles here. How do we reconcile this? A good man leaves inheritance for his grandchildren versus this is a great evil to leave something behind for someone who did not toil for it. How do we make sense of that? Cody?
I've got a couple thoughts on it. To me, when we read all these verses together, it sounds a lot like if you take sort of the in-between, that's kind of got two
Extremes?
I think it's certainly a good thing if you teach your children how to use it and make sure that they understand that part of an inheritance is leaving an inheritance for their children. Kind of like hitting the lottery. People that hit the lottery, they're usually broke in 6 months or
Yes.
they go crazy with it. You wouldn't want to do that to, and I think that's what Solomon was saying is if he has to leave this to someone that he doesn't know. He's had no dealings with this person's training. So it's kind of up in the air what they're going to do with it.
It makes me think of a few things, Cody. I think you're exactly right. First of all, you talk about hitting the lottery. Being Solomon's kid was the Mega Millions, whatever. I don't know what the biggest one is. How did it turn out that we know of? I mean, Rehoboam's really only solid example that we know of, and it doesn't seem like that he handled it very well. So there is certainly that. The idea of this is more than just is an inheritance good or bad, but what has to go along with the training, the parenting, the knowledge of what does this mean, whose is this, and what do we do with it.
You go back and think about Paul, and I think it's funny how they're so intertwined between the spiritual and the physical.
Yes.
Paul's talking because these are his spiritual children.
Yes.
So he's training them spiritually, but he's also telling them about
And I think something else you said that I hadn't made that I think you're right is, why does the proverb say a good man leaves it to his children's children, to his grandchildren? What does that imply? What's that?
He needs to train his children to keep it up.
If you want to have anything left for that next generation, there better be some training of that second generation. Anyway, don't know that's an interesting thought. Steve.
I think that's exactly right. You said it earlier when you said about, this has to do with parenting. You said that in one of your statements. I mean, this is really, when you get down to it, what it's about. I mean, if we are training our children properly, I mean, when you look at Solomon, you think about it, he was not living what God expected, one wife for life.
Right.
He had multiple wives,
Right.
hundreds of them, and he had multiple children. How did he know them? How was he able to train them? How was he able to? It wasn't going to work.
Yes.
Because he didn't listen to God's command.
Mm-hmm.
And so it really goes back to our dedication. If we decide to get married and have a family, our dedication to that from a biblical perspective. And if we do that correctly, we're going to be blessed. That's what God says so many times in His Word. And that those blessings obviously come down to our money.
Yeah.
And what we have.
I think that's very, very well said. And that, I think that idea helps me make sense of this lesson. This is not about is leaving money good or bad necessarily. It's about, are you raising the children who are going to handle God's resources appropriately? So if we haven't taught lesson 1 of this quarter, and we're going to hand things over to people who don't understand lesson 1 of this quarter, what do we expect will happen? It's not going to be great. So I appreciate that comment. Very well taken. Other thoughts or comments as you read this or thought about this? How does this make you think about ideas of inheritance or leaving money to your children or grandchildren or possessions? Doesn't have to be money, as Dad pointed out, possessions. Any other thoughts or just practical things that you think about in that regard?
Well, if you have multiple children, you have to leave children the same amount. Or if you have a child that isn't falling and falling away, you have to leave them anything.
That's a very difficult question. I think we definitely find examples in Scripture where fairness does not always equal equality. That's not to make any, that's not prescriptive. That's just an overall comment that fair doesn't always have to mean equal. But that's a great, it gets real pretty quick. Yes?
Just from my perspective, I mean, we think about it from hitting the lottery standpoint, a child that's not been trained or, this shows in the world, to me, it would almost be a hindrance to them to give them an inheritance.
Yes.
And I'm not speaking necessarily about Robbie's question in general, but I saw on one of your questions here on the pamphlet, what are the positive aspects of inheritance and what are the potential negative aspects? I mean, if a child either has not been trained or chooses the world over godliness and spiritualness, to me, I mean, leaving them an inheritance would be a hindrance to potential for bad things to happen.
Yeah, that's a very thoughtful comment.
We talked about whose money is it anyway? It's God's money.
Right.
So would you prefer to leave it to a charitable Christian organization where you know it's going to be used right, or to a rebellious prodigal that you know wouldn't be used correctly?
Yeah.
And would you be would you personally be making a simple mistake by leaving it to somebody like that?
Yeah. And, I'm going back, I think of Madeline that read the verse in Proverbs 20, a hastily gained, I think that's old language, getting stuff all at once is not always a good thing. Proverbs will tell you it's probably not a good thing. I mean, so what is a blessing? An inheritance gained hastily in the beginning will not be blessed in the end. What is a blessing? The whole world would say a windfall inheritance is a blessing. Maybe for most people it's a loaded gun.
Bypassing the growth process, you're gonna lose.
That's well said. Yeah.
That applies to just about everything. You can't shortcut success spiritually or physically.
Yes.
There's no, I just want to make one observation, I don't want to throw it, but the passage there in Corinthians that you opened up with,
Yes.
parents, children, I think we don't need to lose sight that Paul maybe more so making the application that he is a parent, they as his children, I shouldn't have to support you.
Yes.
The parents ought not to lay it to the children, right? Like he called Timothy or Titus his own son, you're indebted to me, that is to God, but just don't lose sight of that it's not just a monetary issue.
Yeah, no question. I think he's probably using an earthly example to speak to a very spiritual issue. His relationship with the Corinthians, obviously, just the fact that he called them his children is a very spiritual thing.
But again, it speaks to, as you said, parents have the obligation to teach your children the ways of the Lord.
Yes.
And you will prepare them for the third generation. And that teaching has to be ongoing. And you get that right, then they will be faithful stewards of monetary things.
I completely agree. There's a reason that Proverbs 13:11 was in the last class, and it's also I included it in this lesson. Proverbs 13:11. Think about it in terms of this conversation. Wealth gained hastily dwindles, but whoever gathers little by little increases. That's just a Bible principle. I think to your point, should that make us think about even, the way that we handle these issues to our kids? Do you think that the father of the prodigal wishes he would have dosed it out a little differently? Perhaps.
And that's one thing I was gonna say was, I don't disagree with anything anyone said, but we do have that example we need to think about too. He even went to the point, he had a rebellious son while he was still alive, and his son came to him and asked him to liquidate his assets and give him his share of money. Well, that father loved him enough, showed him enough love that, I don't know if the demonstration of love or his teaching, but once he ran out of money, he wanted to come back.
Yes.
Anybody that's gotta make that decision with their children, should think about that too. It'll be a hard choice, but,
So I asked the question here in number 3, what does that parable, there's so many lessons from that parable, and we could spend an entire class, but just in terms of this question, does it make you think about ideas of inheritance any differently?
Well, if we don't leave an inheritance, what happens to it?
Repeat that question for me.
So if we have an inheritance, but we don't leave it to anybody, it goes to the state.
Yeah.
So are we obligated to dedicate that inheritance to maybe not our children, but to brothers and sisters?
What would God have us do with it, right? That's just an overarching question. I've certainly known of people or heard of people, I don't know if I've had a conversation with one, but I've heard of people who had a stranglehold on their things, right? Not God's things, in their mind, their things so tightly they never thought about inheritance, never wanted to leave an inheritance. They're going, wanted to die like Scrooge McDuck with it piled on top of them, never give it up. So there's some selfishness in that mindset for sure, and some ungodliness. But what would God have us do with our stuff in terms of an inheritance? I think it's a really hard question. A good person leaves an inheritance to his children's children. Hastily gained inheritance dwindles. How do we marry all that together to make a godly decision about what we do? When is, to Roger's point, to do this without some, what's the right word? Without some recognition or some understanding of where your child is, would not seem to be wise at all, right? There's so much judgment in that. Is when can this be handled? Is it just a little bit at a time, so that this idea of wealth gained little by little, there's learning and wisdom. Anyway, I think there's many things to think about there in terms of inheritance. I'll also note that it's so interesting how many times in the New Testament our salvation is referred to as our inheritance. To an inheritance undefiled that fades not away, that we will inherit eternal life. Our salvation is referred to as an inheritance so many times. Don't know exactly how that ties to what we're talking about, but I think it's interesting. That's definitely a positive connotation around that word, because it's the way that the Holy Spirit describes our eternal life in Jesus over and over again, our inheritance. We are an heir. Anyway, it was obviously something that requires a lot of thought. Yes, sir, Steve.
So I'm not sure, Michael, how to say this succinctly. I'll try. You and Nikki were saying earlier that kind of referenced something that I think is something that we all need to keep in mind when we're trying to consider the question that you just asked. Because it's really a difficult question. It's not easy. It doesn't matter what kind of stuff and money you have. Even if you have nothing, if you have Christ, you have everything. And so that's something you want to leave as an inheritance to your family.
Yes.
It's called a legacy. In Christianity, we call it a legacy.
Yes.
And so we want that. That's what we all desire as parents to leave. So what I was going to say is one of the things that has got to be considered in all this as well is what Nikki brought up, that, when you see these things, a lot of these things are not, he didn't say this, but a lot of these things are not direct commands necessarily, because they are referring to a different time and a different culture. It wasn't about money back then, it was about land. But it's still the overarching principles. And those principles, when you carry through those, like you just asked, what does our eternal inheritance have to do with what we're talking about? It has everything. Because God is our Father. We are His children. He is leaving us an inheritance that we do not deserve. We are all prodigals. Every one of us. Every single one of us.
Yes.
And what did He do? He gave it to us when we didn't deserve it. He gave it before anything. That makes it even more difficult.
It does.
For us to figure out what we should do when leaving it to our children and how to deal with all of those issues.
Yes.
That's why it's so difficult to be a good parent.
I think that's why this section, a couple of lessons here are difficult, is because the answers aren't easy. And there's not turn to this verse and here's your answer to this fill in the blank question. This is a wrestle with topic because logically and reasonably you think about, is it right or is it fair to give to a child that is going to do ungodly things with it? And yet we know that's what God did for us. So anyway, all of those things in play make it really, really challenging. I think the issue of inheritance is one that probably don't think about in a spiritual context. I think if it all belongs to God, got to have spiritual connotations around that. I mean, if you read it, we will.
So, this is talking about thieves no longer stealing. Let the thief no longer steal, but rather let him labor, doing honest work with his own hands, so that he may have something to share with anyone in need.
Yes.
for a Christian, there's almost no greater feeling than having worked hard, earned a living, and being able to share that with somebody and see it bless someone else.
Yes.
And if you can teach that to your children and leave them an inheritance in which they can do that,
Yes.
and they understand that concept, I mean, to me,
That's a blessing, right?
a blessing.
Yeah. So, in that, like that ideal is a blessing. And every time Satan gets in the way of that, it creates problems that shoot off in every direction, right? There's you throw a wrench into the workings of God's design. We should expect that it creates really, really hard questions. But what you just described, I think, is that ideal that, yeah, I'm gonna bless my children because I know that they're gonna bless other people and use this and be a funnel for God's blessings. That would be the ideal. I love that point. Karen.
I just was gonna say, my dad has always felt that he wanted to help my brother and myself and our families while he was still alive.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, he's leaving us stuff, you know, he still has stuff that I'm gonna receive
Yes.
after he dies.
Yes.
But all along, as we were raising our children, you know, we didn't have a whole lot. My brother and his family didn't have a whole lot. My dad said, I'd rather give you a little bit at a time while I'm still here,
Yes.
so that you learn how to help other people when I'm gone.
I mean, I wonder where a godly man got that idea, right?
I know. I always wondered.
There you go. Thomas.
I guess another way you can kind of look at it too is that, you know, if you're a child of Christ, you're a godly man or woman, God blesses you. Yeah, it trickles down to your children, but ultimately He's blessing you because of what you're doing. If you teach your kids right, then yeah, it'd be great to leave them an inheritance, but ultimately what God gave you is God's. And if you teach them right, God will bless them also. So you really don't need to leave them an inheritance. You give what God has blessed you with back to God. You borrowed it from Him.
Yeah, it's all on loan, right? And what's the right thing to do with it? That's a viewpoint.
Yeah.
I love it. Not an easy question. We are going to do section 3 because I do want to answer this question because I think it's also important. Think about later in our lives, perhaps. Retirement. I had somebody I think is very wise point out to me one time how few Bible characters seem to end well. That stuck with me. If you make a list of all the Bible characters, how many of them really ended well? I think you'd be surprised how many don't end well. So this idea of what is retirement, how do we think about retirement? Let's read some verses. Roger, do you mind Ecclesiastes 5 and verse 18? And then Fern, if you don't mind, Numbers 8, 24 through 26. So Roger, whenever you're ready.
Behold, what I have seen to be good and fitting is to eat and drink and find enjoyment in all the toil which one toils under the sun the few days of his life that God has given him. For this is his lot.
And go ahead and read verse 19, if you will.
Everyone also to whom God has given wealth and possessions and power to enjoy them, and to accept his lot and rejoice in his toil. This is the gift of God.
We'll keep that verse in our thoughts. And then Fern, a really interesting note here, Moses, God through Moses, in Numbers chapter 8, talking about work being done at the tabernacle. Fern, start, if you don't mind, in verse 23. Let's read 23 through 26.
Now the Lord spoke to Moses, saying, This is what applies to the Levites. From 25 years old and upward, they shall enter to perform service in the work of the tent of meeting. But at the age of 50 years, they shall retire from service in the work and not work anymore. They may, however, assist their brothers in the tent of meeting to keep an obligation, but they themselves shall do no work. Thus you shall deal with the Levites concerning their obligations.
I don't want to make more of what God commands the Levites here than maybe we should, but I do think it's an interesting window into the way that God taught his people under the old law. What was, based on what we just read, and you hopefully had a chance to read that earlier, put that into our language. What was God telling the Levites?
You do the work at the temple for 25 years, and then you turn that over to a younger person, but you mentor them and help them along the way.
That's well said. So a couple of things about that. When it says, you shall do no work in the tabernacle, and remember where we are here in the book of Numbers, why was that perhaps suited to a younger person? What are we talking about doing? Dead animals, part of it.
Carrying firewood.
Carrying firewood, okay. Not only that, remember where we are. We're talking about carrying the tabernacle around. This was the job of the Levites. Roll this thing up, put it on your shoulders, and haul it around. And all the intricacy that went along to the walls of the tabernacle and all the furnishings of the tabernacle, that they all had to be, they were hauled around the desert for 40 years, right? So hauling heavy, all the fabrics and metals and wood that went into all these things, the altar and the table of showbread, all that stuff, right? And the tabernacle itself. Read Leviticus about all the poles and the hooks and there was significant work that went into tearing this down, hauling it around, setting it back up all the time as we're traveling through the wilderness here. This was this was better suited for young men. It was real work. No offense to anyone over the age of 50 in this room. This is work. This is real work. And God said, hey, at a certain age, your skills are better used, I'm going to use Dad's word, your skills are better used mentoring someone else. Okay, just keep that thought in mind. By the way, the NET and Fern, what version were you reading, Fern? Is that New American Standard? They literally use the word retire from the work, which I think is interesting. So, just one question in this section. How does the modern concept of retirement fit with Bible principles? And are there any aspects of retirement, the way we think about it today, that do not mesh with Bible principles or Bible teaching? I will take a swing at that one.
But we forget the very important principle of not mentoring. We don't mentor for the most part. I mean, there's some companies that will utilize those that are heading out to kind of mentor, but for the most part, when you're ready to retire, see it. Here's your severance, here's your whatever.
Yes. Yeah. And I don't think it's just a corporate problem. I read an interesting study one time about how many young men, this is Christianity writ large, but how many young men, at least verbally, desired to have a mentor they didn't think they had in the church. So I'm going to put a pin in that one. So what's the world's concept of retirement?
401k.
Take that 401k and do what, Thomas?
Well, I think with 401k, you really want to get it down to the bottom of it, the way like gambling, you're playing the stock market.
So that's a whole different comment on investing. We're gonna hold for another time. But what is the concept of retirement itself?
To have something left over at the end, to live work.
What's that?
You're retiring from work.
Retiring from work. So again, let's go to this modern American concept. What are you doing?
Relaxing, traveling, being lazy.
Yeah, this is you've done your work, right? And now this is, I'm gonna use Brandy's words, you're being lazy. You have the opportunity to do nothing, right? The opportunity to go do what you want to do. You've done what the corporate world's told you to do, or you've had to work for all these years. Now you're going to do what you want to do. That's again, overgeneralizing. That's the. We painted the picture. That's funny. Bless your heart. But that would be the modern ideal, right? That's kind of the American dream, right? You can retire, you get your gold watch, and you go do what you want to do. So, how does that marry with anything we've read, and how does that, is that the first bill? How does that how does it not seem to marry well with things that we've studied?
Well, those blessings you're saving could have been used.
Yep.
So,
So there's a comment on saving and investing, which we talked a little bit about last time, the positive aspect of that. Understand that. Does the Bible seem to indicate that, hey, there may be a time where physical labor needs to end?
good.
Yeah, I think Numbers, there's other places that make that point. Like, we're in the salt mines, physically, there may be a time where that needs to end. And then what?
I think there's like that word retire, and you probably don't bring it up, but that's the only time it's used in the Bible, is what we just read.
Yes,
And work is used, it says 550 times.
yes,
So, and it was, again, culture was different. Culture was different back then. And it may be true, somebody will tell me, 'cause I'm not a history buff, but there was, what I read, so there really, nobody retired till after the Great Depression. There was no such thing as our great-great-great-grandparents worked till they died. Of course, they were mostly farming.
Yep.
And that's different. But retirement is really
it's a wealthy culture. It's a wealthy culture phenomenon.
do other countries retire? I guess from other places. I don't know that.
I mean, it depends on how wealthy they are, right? I mean, I don't think that anyone in Zimbabwe is worried about retirement, right? They're worried about eating tomorrow.
Yep.
It's a wealthy culture phenomenon. So,
Steve had a good point, I think. It depends on what we plan to do, but L word's probably not a good word.
yeah, Sam wouldn't like that. Won't let Sam in here. Yeah. No, agreed. So, expound on that for me. What?
It's your goal to get home and lay on the couch and watch TV. Or even just do selfish things just for yourself when you retire. Probably not the best goal to have, but as Roger and Bert said, life happens.
Yes.
Luckily, I hope we save for things like that happen when we get at the age of retirement. Things happen. I know my mom and dad, things happen. They've tried to save it, and things happen.
Yes. Yes. Life happens.
I think
So,
from a secular job, I don't think.
So there's a couple of things, and I agree with you on that. There's this James idea about sometimes we assume too much, right? We say, well, today and tomorrow we're going to go and get gain, then we're going to retire, and then we're going to do this. There's certainly that aspect of we can assume a little too much. And then I think that you said it, or somebody said it a minute ago, is what's our concept of what that means? What does retirement from a secular position mean about our work for God? Karen.
I know, and this is just personal.
Yes.
My dad retired.
Yes.
That's when he and my mom did missionary work.
Yes.
Financed their own way. They spread the gospel in many countries. And I know we weren't quite retired, but we chose to use an inheritance that he received to go to China and marry a little girl, actually.
Yeah.
So she would have a chance of salvation.
That is that's a retirement plan that you don't read in the right. You don't read in the John Hancock brochure. It's a very different way to think about what is retirement and what's it for. And aren't those encouraging stories about when people use that to double down on what they're doing spiritually, that I have more time for God?
Yeah. Don't ever think that when you retire that you actually are not going to be working. It's a choice
Yes.
of what type of work you want to continue.
Very wise. So why is it that not just Bible characters, but why Why is it that, just, again, look out in the world, why is it that people sometimes don't end well? Well, their focus is on something other than continuing to work for the Lord. You know, you run out of, you think that life is over, rather than moving on to a different kind of work, or maybe a more important kind of work. Really good stuff. Thank you, everybody, for your comments. Section 1 and 2, I know everybody loves their own cooking. I really like Lesson 9. So please take a moment and look at sections 1 and 2 of Lesson 9. We'll talk about those on Sunday. Thanks, everybody.